Hello and welcome back, this is Laura from Crafty Not Shifty, and today I'm sharing my 10 cards using the July 2018 Love From Lizi card kit. The very first thing that I'm going to do here is use this background stamp. This is a really unique design stamp. This has actually got a repeating image. So you'll see I'm just going to use my stamp press here to press this down. The nice thing about this is that the foam feet on this stamp press allow you to kind of wiggle the stamp around until you've got perfect placement each time you stamp. So this is what it looks like when you use that stamp on its own. It's a really pretty kind of background piece with the shells and the starfish, but then you can go ahead and actually line up those edges and stamp it down again, and you could keep doing this as many times as you wanted. You could fill this entire page, and because that pattern repeats, it'll match up kind of seamlessly along those two edges. You don't have to use a press like this to do this, you can just use an acrylic block, but I wanted to use this because it makes it a little bit easier. So you'll notice that when I press this down, I'm kind of walking my fingers all over the edges of the stamp, and that's just to try and encourage some really nice clean stamping. You could definitely use your MISTI for this as well, and that would almost guarantee that you'd get perfect stamping. Okay, so I trimmed that piece down. I'm actually not going to colour this. I really liked that kind of just light grey subtle stamping in the background, so I trimmed it down and I'm going to use that as a background piece. And then I'm taking one of the decoupage sheets. There were many decoupage sheets included in this month's kit, and I will use a few of them. I'm taking you through this one here and kind of showing you how I used the foam squares that were included in the kit to make use of this decoupage piece. I will use the decoupage pieces again, but I won't always take you through watching me put those foam squares on the back and peel off the backing, because I appreciate that that would get a little repetitive and isn't necessarily a technique that you'd be interested in learning anything from. It's very simple, just peel and stick. So you can see the piece there with just 2 layers, and I think that looks really great, and you could definitely just use those 2 layers to kind of stretch your supplies a little bit further and to get some more cards out of this kit. For this particular one, I'm going to go ahead and use all of the pieces and really get an awful lot of dimension on this by layering it up. And you'll see here that even though there are many layers to this piece, once I've applied all of the foam pieces, it's actually not too big. It would still fit into an envelope. You may want to use a padded envelope if you're mailing something like this, just to protect all of that dimension, but it will go through the post no problem, or at least that's certainly true here in the UK. So once I've got that all layered up, I'll just move those pieces out of the way, and then I'm just using my ATG, which dispenses double-sided adhesive, to stick that onto the front of my base. So next I have the Let's Shell-abrate. I think this is a really sweet kind of punny sentiment that works perfectly with all the shells in the background. And I've got that Let's Shell-abrate, and then I'm using one of the wooden pieces which I coloured using some of my alcohol markers. I actually coloured the pink one on the front and then decided I'd gone too dark, so I used the back to recolour it again, and then I added that yellow shell as well. Once I was finished, I used my Nuvo drops to just add a little bit of dimension to those white polka dots in the background, and it just added just a little bit more dimension to this super dimensional piece, so it kept the background in kind of in theme with that foreground image. Okay, so on to card number 2. For this one, really high-tech technique. I took a piece of scrap paper or scratch paper and just cut a wonky edge, and I'm using this almost as kind of like a cloud background. It actually looks a little bit more like a wave, but you'll see it comes together just fine in the end. I've taped a piece of cardstock down. Now you'll notice in my 10 cards I actually use more white cardstock than is included in the kit. I added in a couple of extra pieces from my stash, and I've just got this piece taped down. It's actually a card size, it's 4 1/4 by 11, scored at 5.5, and I've got that tape along the 5.5 score line, and then I'm just applying some of my distress ink. I believe this is tumbled glass, and I'm using a mini ink blending tool to do that, and I'm just going over this, adding those lines. I then go back in and kind of ink blend across the whole thing, and you'll see that I've got a bit of a a bit of a harsh edge just in the top left hand corner of the screen on my card, but I do go ahead and blend that out so it's not as noticeable on the finished card. And I just work my way through kind of ink blending those white spaces and adding a little bit more colour, but you still manage to keep the definition of those kind of waves or clouds. So then I wanted to add this ephemera piece, this kind of beach hut. I think it just looks so sweet, and to kind of give that something to sit on, I thought I'd use my sand that was included in the kit. This was a really interesting item to have in the card kit, and I thought it would be really nice as my beachy background. Now, one thing that I would advise if you were going to recreate this look is rather than adding your wet glue onto the bottom of the card directly, I think it would actually work really well to cut a piece of kind of sand coloured cardstock, maybe like a Nina Desert Storm, and cover that piece there first, because once I'd stuck the sand down you could ever so slightly see through to that blue background. I've just used here a scrap piece of paper, and I'm using that to catch any of the stray sand, and I also used it to help me press the sand into the card. So I just moved that piece off of my desk, and then I'm going to come back in with my card and just press it back into that sand, just to make sure that any of that exposed adhesive is completely covered with the sand, and then I'm just using my fingers to flick any of the excess away. So I added a whole bunch of foam squares again. I've really worked through these foam squares in this kit, and I still have a ton left, so you definitely have more than would be required provided for you in the kit, so you can use them completely guilt-free when creating your decoupage cards or when adding dimension like with this beach hut. I then added the little starfish, and I again coloured it with some of my alcohol markers, and now here, bear with me, I am certainly not an artist. Now, it's really easy to create just kind of a V shape for some birds in the background. I fussed over this for quite a while, and I don't know, they don't even look that good after I fussed with it, so you kind of can see my limited artistic ability. So I was trying to decide here if I wanted to put the beach sentiment, and I decided to leave that off the front of the card and maybe stamp it on the inside instead. Okay, moving on to card 3. So here I have a panel that I've trimmed down, and I've added some adhesive onto the back, and then I'm just pressing some of this thin yellow ribbon onto the front of that panel. I press that into the exposed adhesive on the back of that piece, and then I'm going to go ahead and mount that up onto the yellow cardstock that came in the kit. And that just gives me a nice yellow border around that white piece. Now I've die cut a whole bunch of the ice creams. This ice cream die is very sweet. It came in the kit with the ice cream and the cone as one die, and then also a flake die that came as an extra piece. So I die cut everything a couple of times, and I've just popped out the insides of each of those, the kind of the swirls on the ice cream, and then I'm just using some liquid adhesive to stick that down, and I'm allowing each piece to dry with a block on top of it. That just helps to hold it down and make sure that the edges stick properly. So I worked my way through and did the exact same thing to each of these. I just eyeballed the spacing. You certainly could create a grid for yourself using a pencil if you prefer, but I was happy enough to just eyeball this. I did use the specialty cardstock for the ice cream portion of the ice cream cone, and also for the cone section as well. So the cone is sort of that, it's almost like a tan colour, but it's very kind of pink. I felt like it worked really well for the ice cream cone, and then I have the pink and the white for the ice cream. So I had to go ahead and use the flakes as well. I felt like the ice cream wouldn't be complete without those flakes, so I die cut that a bunch of times as well. Before I add those, I've got this sentiment here. This didn't come in the kit, this was a sentiment that I had in my stash, and it says, "I love you more than ice cream, that's a lot." So the specialty card that I used for the flakes, I believe was actually provided in a previous month's kit, and it's another one of the Love From Lizi specialty cardstocks, and I felt like the colour worked perfectly for those chocolate flakes. So I'm tucking those inside the ice cream. I had let the ice creams dry maybe a little bit too long before I did this step. I kind of forgot about adding them, to be perfectly honest. So you'll see with this last one I had a little bit of difficulty just kind of trying to lift that piece up and then tuck the flake in. So I brought my tweezers in and that definitely helped, and then I managed to get that just tucked in. So I felt like for this piece, oh well, let's go ahead and mount it on the card. So it's not on the card currently. I worked on a yellow cutout and then used a white card base just to kind of mimic that kind of white, yellow, and then the white again. And I just think it's a really nice way to frame maybe a smaller die cut that you have on your card. So then for my ice cream swirls, I just had to use this Nuvo. This was provided in a previous month's kit, and I believe this is the Jewel Drops, and I want to say, let me check. Okay, yes, so this is the Strawberry Coulis colour. This is a really beautiful colour, and it is perfect for on top of these ice creams. So I filled in any of those kind of spaces where I felt like the sauce would have gone on the ice cream. I just filled those in with this Nuvo. And again, this is the Nuvo drops that came in a previous month's kit. The white ones are the ones that were included this month. So once I'd filled in all of those gaps, that's this card completed as well, and we can move on to card number 4. So card 4, I have a patterned piece of paper, I've got a blue card base, and I also have this ribbon. So full disclosure, I did not cut enough ribbon for the design that I wanted, and you'll see that in just a moment. The ribbon has a series of beach huts that repeats across the ribbon, and I wanted to centre one of those patterns across my card, but you'll see here I didn't leave myself quite enough ribbon. It worked out just fine in the end because I was able to trim away any of the excess. So here I'm just running my scissors along the edge of one of those decoupage pieces. When you pop them out of the sheet that they come in, it can kind of leave a small edge along the side from where it's been kind of pre-cut and it's got that little section to pop out. That's just a really easy way to get rid of those edges with your scissors. And for this one I'm just using 2 of the layers, and I've actually trimmed this piece down to be a little bit smaller. I wanted this to be a focal element off to one side of the card, so I didn't want to use it at full size. So I trimmed it down so it would be a little bit shorter and a little bit narrower, and then it fits nicely in that gap above the ribbon. So at this point, if you've stuck with me this long, you've possibly noticed. It sounds really awful to me, but I've had a few people tell me it doesn't sound too bad. Maybe they were just being kind, but I've had a cold recently, so I feel like I sound extremely kind of nasal and not too great, so apologies for that. Whilst I was waffling about feeling ill, I went ahead and stamped on the specialty cardstock just for a bit of shine, and I used one of the sentiments from the kit and then added 2 layers of the foam squares just to pop that piece up so it would be in line with the 2 layers of the decoupage sheet. And then added my ATG onto the back of that piece and mounted it onto the blue cardstock. And I just love that sentiment that happiness comes in waves. Okay, so card 5, we've got another beach hut, and this time it's from the decoupage sheet, and I wanted to make it into a Polaroid picture frame. So I had this Polaroid frame in my stash, and I added double-sided sticky tape all around those edges. I'm just being careful to make sure that it's only on those edges and not hanging inside the frame. And then I'm adding a piece of acetate to cover that up because you guessed it, I'm making a shaker card. It's been a while since I've made a shaker card, but I felt like this piece was perfect for a shaker. So I went ahead and added double-sided tape all over the back of that foam piece, and then I'm adding my sequins into the centre. I just use that triangle shaped tray because it helps me to funnel all those sequins back into the jar, and then I'm peeling the adhesive off the back of this frame, and then I'm going to go ahead and line it up over the top of the image, not forgetting my anti-static powder tool because it helps the sequins not to stick to any of the exposed adhesive on the edges of those foam strips, and then I'm laying that down exactly where I want it over that piece. I'll just use my scissors to cut off any of the excess. And I'm just angling them slightly to the back of that piece just to make sure the edges look perfect from the sides. And then naturally I had a bit of a play with the shaker element because you cannot make a shaker card without having a play with it for a while before you stick it on your card base. And for the card base I'm using the blue cardstock included in the kit, and then a patterned paper that's included that's been trimmed to be ever so slightly smaller. And then I'm going to go ahead and stick this Polaroid piece down. I wasn't sure if I wanted it to be stuck down perfectly in line or at an angle, and I decided an angle was best for what I wanted. So here I have the puffy stickers, and these are triangular stickers that are perfect for creating some bunting. And I'm just snipping away some of the adhesive that's holding my Polaroid in place so I can tuck one of those pieces in the background, and then just laying those at an angle to create my bunting. And I fiddled with them for a while before I pressed them down firmly, just to make sure that I had the spacing nice and even, exactly how I wanted it to be across the front. So this part I definitely should have done before I added foam behind my Polaroid, because it was quite difficult to get perfect stamping here. So you'll see that there's a little bit of that let's Shell-abrate sentiment that's missed off, but I just fixed that with a black marker pen. And it was nice and easy to kind of trace the outline of those letters where I'd misstamped. But if you're going to recreate this, definitely do your stamping before you add your foam onto the back. So I wanted to use this shell with that sentiment, and I just stamped that down onto a scrap of paper, and then I'm using some of my pens to colour it in. I used a grey pen, this is IG3, from the Spectrum Noir range, and I use that to add my shading. Now, I am not an expert at colouring, I think that's definitely fair to say, so it's just very basic colouring. I'm testing a couple of pinks off to the side, and then I ended up using this one. And I'm not holding my hand still enough for me to be able to read which marker this is, but it's a nice kind of, a bright but kind of pale pink. Does that make any sense? This is why I'm not great at colouring. I can't even name my colours. But once I was happy with how that looked, I just fussy cut this piece out, leaving a bit of a white border, almost as if it had been cut by a die, and just left a white border around the edge. So I stuck this down. I believe I used a foam pad. Yes, I did. As I say, I really did use a lot of these foam squares, and I have a lot left. So once that was stuck down, I decided to add some Wink of Stella over the top to add some subtle glitter to my shell, and that is card 5 finished. Naturally, I'm having another play with the shaker element, and then we'll move on to card 6. So card 6, I decided to use this stencil. I actually said in my unboxing video that this would be really great to make like a bokeh, which I believe is how you say it, background, and it would be great for that. But I decided for this video that actually I would do like a really bright take on that kind of a look. And I'm just using, I have an ink pad here that has a bunch of different colours, and you kind of slide it together and it becomes like a ombre kind of an ink pad, or at least a multicoloured ink pad. I decided to use each of those colour sections to create a really bright and colourful kind of circle background pattern. All I did for this was use a finger dauber for each colour. I've again got everything taped down onto this piece of laminated cardstock, and that just helps for easy cleanup. So I'm moving the stencil around and just adding in each of these circles, and you'll notice that I'm layering them one over the top of the other. I think that just kind of adds to this pattern and to this look, to kind of layer those circles one on top of the other. And I just worked my way through. I started off with the larger circles just to kind of fill in some of that background space. But you'll see as I go through this, I move into using some of the smaller ones and just adding a little bit more detail. Once I was done with each of those colours, and I will skip past this, I won't make you watch all of it, but once I was done with each of those colours, I also used a white pigment ink just to go back over and add some kind of softer tones. So I went directly over some of the circles and then just did some extra spots as well with the white. And so I think this is really fun. It's very kind of chaotic and messy, but it's an interesting way to create your own background paper. And if this is kind of too fussy and too much, you could use less colours or less areas of the stencil. And you could also trim this down, so you only use part of this on your background. I decided, like a crazy person, to use the whole thing. I really liked the bright and colourful look. And I wanted to keep the rest of the card kind of simple, which seems like a strange thing to say when the background's so fussy. I don't think you can kind of describe this card as simple, but I decided to use the peel-offs to create a bit of an accent in the background, and these are really soft. They're actually clear with pink glitter from what I can tell, So it was really nice just to kind of add those in the background to add a little bit more of a focal, kind of draw your eye into the ice cream. So I decided, believe it or not, that there wasn't quite enough going on with this background piece, and I decided to use those white Nuvo drops just to add a whole bunch of extra white dots in that background. And once I was happy with the background piece, I actually moved on to adding some of the white drops into the background of the ice cream ephemera piece. And kind of no rhyme or reason to it. I just added a whole different bunch of dots, and I kept them relatively within the same size. I didn't do any kind of super large or super tiny dots. I just added a whole bunch of pretty similar sized white dots to that background piece, and I actually really love how this turned out. It's definitely a little bit chaotic, but it's very fun and very bright, and I think this would make a really nice birthday card. So once I'd used a whole bunch of the Nuvo, that is this card finished, and we can move on to card 7. So I'm using that really nice bright yellow again, and I have a strip of patterned paper that I've cut down to lay across this, and this is the kind of beach scene with all the different little critters and their sandcastles. And then I'm going to add some more of those peel offs. Once I start using them, it's difficult to stop, and I'm just using it along the edge there where the background scene meets the I almost said white, that's not right, meets the yellow card base. So from this other piece, which is very similar in its colours but has the buckets and spades, I just used a circle punch to cut out a circle. And I'm going to use some more of those foam squares to mount that up. And you can see here, I mean, I am not shy with my foam squares, and honestly I really do have a ton of them left. So I decided, rather than having that yellow base be kind of plain as it is, I decided to use the shell and just stamp that in Versamark. My Versamark ink pad is not the cleanest. I should probably look to invest in another one, but it still works. So yeah, I'm probably not going to invest in another one. It still works for me. And what that does is apply almost like a watermark effect to the background, so you can see those shells but they're not super obvious. So then I stuck down my circle piece and I added the happiness comes in waves sentiment. I lay another one of those glitter peel offs along the bottom of the card, and then I laid one, I placed one higher up on this card. I actually end up moving it, and you'll see that in the final pictures that I have over on my blog, or the kind of run through at the end of this video. So I pressed the anchor into a blue ink pad to colour it. It's a slightly different way of colouring than the other wooden pieces that I've used so far, and I just added some glue onto the back and placed that into this circle. Okay, card 8. So this time I'm using the red card base, and I'm using this bunting piece. You'll notice that I've cut this to be the wrong size. This wasn't intentional to have that gap over on the side, but I'll fix that just by trimming off that excess. So I used the Fun in the Sun piece. This is another one of the decoupage pieces, and I'm going to go ahead and use all of the layers on this piece again. I thought this one was really sweet, the kind of beach hut or summer house or whichever it may be, and then the cute little dog. So I added those extra windows and the layer with the dog and the bucket and spade, and then there's also a layer for the Fun in the Sun, which I believe I'll add later on. So I used my paper trimmer to trim off the excess because of all that dimension that I've added with the decoupage piece. I didn't quite get a clean cut through my paper, but I just fixed that with some scissors, and then I'll go ahead and add that Fun in the Sun layer as well. Once I'd finished with that, it was time to do some more stamping. So I'm using the beach sentiment, the best escape anyone can have, which I just think is a brilliant sentiment. I really like this one. I trimmed that out and then just used a single layer of foam squares just to mount that up slightly off to one side on the left hand side of the card. And I can't decide with this month kind of which card is my favourite. I really like this one because of the rounded edges. I wanted to mirror the rounded edges on the decoupage piece with the card base, but I couldn't figure out which one was my favourite, so you guys let me know in the comments which one's your favourite. So here I have a piece of fun foam, and I'm using my die cut machine to cut that out, and then I have just an older acrylic block that I applied some double-sided adhesive onto, and then I'm actually laying those pieces as if it was like a cling mount stamp. And I'm going to use some ink, and I'm actually going to stamp a background with this piece. And you'll see as I go through, I mean, you can get relatively, kind of good stamping, really, considering that you've just created this stamp using a die and fun foam. But one thing to be aware of is that because the profile of the stamp isn't very deep, you do run the risk of getting ink on the edges of your block. So you'll see me kind of periodically use a baby wipe just to clean off any of that excess. And as long as you remember to do that, you can get really good stamping, considering you've just made this yourself using a die and some fun foam. And then it will just peel off from the block. It won't damage your block, or at least certainly in my experience it hasn't damaged my block. This is a block that I was actually gifted from a friend, and yeah, it's a little bit dirty and messy anyway, so I wasn't too concerned, but it did peel away just fine. So I've got a strip of the glittery ice cream card and or ice cream patterned paper, and I'm just laying that down onto the card and adding some more of those peel-offs. Once again, I'll trim off the excess, and any of that excess just goes back onto my sheet to reuse. So I had to use this ice cream piece. It is just perfect for this card, and it has a little foam dot on the back, but I wanted to add, you guessed it, more foam squares. So I peeled that one off and just used my foam squares from the kit, because that way I knew that the dimension of the foam would be nice and even. So I knew that I wanted to add a sentiment to this piece, and I wanted my sentiment to be on a banner. So I'm using this banner die here, which is, it cuts out a banner that's far too long. And I just kind of eyeballed where I would want that banner to finish, and then lay the die directly over the top and just ran it partially through my die cut machine just to snip off that edge. I hope that makes sense. And that way I was able to make sure that I could have the kind of stitching detail along the top edge of the die. I could have just ran it through my paper trimmer and cut off the excess, but I wouldn't have maintained the stitching detail. So again, this is a sentiment that I had in my stash. I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. And I'm just adding a little bandana here. This right here made me laugh. I think it kind of looks like a tooth with a headband. Maybe that's just me, but it made me laugh. And this is a momentous occasion. This is my first attempt at tying a bow on camera, and it worked. So maybe everybody's right, maybe this thin ribbon really does help. So I was able to successfully tie a bow, which shouldn't be that hard, but it usually is for me, and it is teeny weeny. It is the cutest little bow, and I just added that with a dot of glue off to one side, and then yet more foam squares just to mount that piece up. I'm really pleased with how this one turned out. Okay, card 10. This is something a little bit different. I don't think I've done this before on my channel, but I decided to make a shaped card. I'm using the largest circle die that I own. I'm not sure exactly of the dimensions, but it's the largest one I have, and it was just slightly larger than this decoupage piece, which made it perfect to just leave a white border around the edge. This card could not be easier. I'm literally die cut 2 circles and then add the decoupage pieces on top, which really doesn't take any time at all. And then that second circle, I just scored it towards the top, and I'll use that as the fold, and that will make it so I can open and close this card. It's really, really simple. So you can see here I'm applying double-sided tape just along where I've scored this piece, and I'm just adding 2 layers just to make sure I've got adhesive right up to the top of that piece, and then line them both up and press it down, and then the card will open and close. So if you haven't tried a shaped card before, I would definitely encourage you to do so. Okay, so here is a run through of all 10 cards. As usual, I will fiddle about with the cards on the screen trying to make them all fit, but hopefully this will give you another run through and another chance to look at each of the cards. As I mentioned before, I found it really difficult to pick a favourite this month. Do let me know what your favourite is, and let me know if you've tried some of these techniques before or if I've inspired you to give it a try. If you are not a subscriber to the Love From Lizi kits, I'll have all of the links in the description below where you can purchase this kit and how you can become a subscriber. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and for sticking around to the end. On screen right now I have a couple more videos that I think you might enjoy. If you haven't already watched them, go ahead and click on the videos, and I hope to see you back here again soon. And that's all from me. Bye for now.